Hello, everybody. Welcome. Art of Sacred Embodiment here. Let me adjust my screen. I think that's better. Hi, thanks for joining me today. Thanks for being here as always. Can you hear the birds? I don't know if you guys can hear them. So I'm taking all of the opportunity I can to be in my backyard, which is very overgrown right now, because I'm moving, and within the next couple weeks probably, so a whole new timeline is dropping in, and I'll probably talk about that at some point, more so through the lens of, shifting timelines, shifting life streams, shifting consciousness, shifting and activating blueprint orientation, which is what we're going to talk about today. So we talk a lot about, as you know, living from the inside out rather than the outside in, and how much more important that is becoming. Why is that becoming more and more important? Because as we go through this evolutionary process, right, of spiritual evolution, of expanding consciousness in soul remembrance, we are no longer navigating from the external realm of the 3D plane as it being the only plane of existence, right? That is not the only expression of how life is lived. In some ways, it's simply the playing field that we're here to activate into and enact, right, the character that we are, so to speak. But if we believe that that is what is real, we live in views of distortions. We live in an old paradigm. We could say that living from the outside in was sort of necessary for certain stages and phases of our development. And now we're at turning points into new stages and phases of development, of consciousness, of connection to the body, of inner listening, of deeper fulfillment in connection with all that is bigger than just our ego construct. So I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. So we all have our soul blueprint. Our soul blueprint, we could say there's a lot of different ways we can term this and a lot of different ways it's talked about. But let's just say, for instance, our soul blueprint is always guiding us, but during stages of ego development, which is necessary and needed, we think we're living from the personality, from the conditioning that the world tells us, right? So the mandates of the external world. This is what you need to be happy. This is what you need to have success. This is what you need to survive. This is how you need to operate in the world. This is what you need for your education. This is what you need for, there are boxes that the majority lives in. And those boxes are programmed. And then they're programmed into our family systems, they're programmed into our government systems, they're programmed into our religious systems, they're programmed into our medical systems. They're programmed into our educational system, our financial systems, right? Because those have been stepping stones in previous paradigms that have evolved us from the outside. And those systems are now collapsing, and that's because the game is changing. The new game is, how do I remember that I am this sacred vessel and vehicle? My body, my consciousness, right? My energy body is a sacred vehicle for soul remembrance, i.e., divine humanness. So let's just break that down a little bit. If you've listened to most of my other videos, what I always say is that the majority of us do not have our complete soul power in our body. This is what embodiment is about. We have fragments and fractals that are fragmented and fractalized based on our life journey and karma and frequency, excuse me, and consciousness. As we continue to go through this evolutionary process and we do our healing work, I'm kind of liking to call our healing work more like wholeness integration, because every bit of our healing that we do, every time we overcome or we step into or we clear a past distortion or inner wound or trauma, we pull a part of our soul fragmentation back and we become more whole. The more that we do this, we're just doing more and more of it. That soul power becomes a magnet then that remembers us home into the sacred container energetically, solidifies and strengthens us quicker. The more that this happens, the more that our blueprint, right, which is our own divine geometric coding, our own frequencies of our highest expression, the more that comes online, the more we begin to, it's like a homing device. It calls us home and we remember more and more of what we have forgotten. Now, our ego construct, right? Even if we're living from our programming and distortions, which most of us are living from, it's not good or bad. It's just part of the process, right? Most of us live from our ego programmed construct the majority of our life, until usually something happens. And usually it's something that feels rather traumatic, all right? It can be, I call them tower moments from the tarot. When these moments happen, it can be the end of a relationship, right? The end of a marriage. It can be an illness. It can be a loss of, a career that we have built our external foundation on. Because that is what the 3D world, that's how it operates. We build from the outside. And then what usually happens is we haven't had the time or the opportunity to fortify our know thyself. So when things on the outside fail, we then, because that's what we have built our stability on, our foundation on, our beliefs on, our ideas and ideals on, when they crumble, that means we crumble. And those are the tower moments when life is waking us up. Life is saying, okay, now it's time to start looking at yourself and the world from a different perspective. Now, our blueprints, or rather our soul, is always guiding us, even through our ego constructs. And that's the beauty. When we start waking up, we can start like really seeing and connecting these amazing dots of like, oh my gosh, that's why I was drawn to that. That's why I, made that decision. That's why I chose that person, right? That's why I chose to move across country. Because we have snippets of time where we're actually listening, we're actually inner listening. But we don't really understand before we start waking up and remembering, we don't always understand that that's what's happening, right? They're epiphanies. They're like, oh my gosh, I just had this great idea. And we did. But it was mostly that energy of soul that is within us, or our guides, or our highest selves that haven't anchored in yet, but they're supporting us, they're guiding us, they're holding us. But when we start to land in our bodies more, when we begin to ask for help, we don't even have to know what we're asking, who we're asking. We don't need to know that. We just know that organically we begin to open to, I don't know what I'm doing, right? Sometimes it's that simple. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I am not, what I'm doing isn't working. So then we begin to open and look for assistance. We begin to look for information to help us make sense of why we're experiencing these crumbling events, or why we feel so lost, or why we feel so deeply lonely. Okay? So when we start doing this, we open up to the divine. And the divine can actually start helping us and supporting us. As this happens, because we surrender part of our ego construct, we open up and we allow our blueprint, our divine signature, to begin to activate and drop from an energetic template, start dropping into our physical being, connecting and turning on our sacred anatomy, right, which is our chakra systems, which is our meridians more fully, which is the Ida and the Pingala, which are parts of our brain, which are parts of our nervous system, right, which is our energy bodies, which is our sensory faculties begin to heighten. And as our blueprint starts to drop in, we then begin to allow a new orientation. We begin to make choices based on, what do I need in order to feel more peace? What do I need to change in order to feel more joy? How do I feel more secure in myself? How do I heal these parts of me that now I recognize have been guiding me through distortion rather than the truth of who I am? So just stop and think for a minute. Close your eyes. And my guess is you're gonna see these windows in your own life. You're gonna feel your tower moments, because we don't just have one, we have many of them. But usually that first one, whoo, it's a doozy, right? So our blueprint carries our highest potential outcomes. So I'm going to say that again. Our divine blueprint carries our highest outcome potentials. That is our unique soul essence. Each soul is not cut out for the cookie cutter box that the 3D has tried to mandate over thousands of years. It's fine. It's what it does. Right? There's a mechanism of control that the 3D institutes. A 3D consciousness operates on control, survival, okay, and outsourcing our consciousness and our energy. Meaning we have to go out in order to, to do these things. It's just how it operates. And it looks like there's a one size fits all, right? So if we go back in time and look at what we thought even early education was, and the ways in which children were all taught the same things, because there was an expectation that every individual was supposed to learn in the same ways. But that was never true. But they were herded, right? We as children, especially if we're older, we were herded into boxes that we needed to only operate from, one part of our brain. We had to learn through, memorization. Maybe it was, not visual. So people who learned visually, there wasn't an outlet for them. Or people who learned, through, hands-on tactile experience, there wasn't an outlet for them. So unless you were lucky enough, I went to a Montessori school in my very early, not for very long, but I was fortunate that my parents had an awareness that there were different ways of learning, right? And Montessori schools supported that, and I think they still do, as well as, why can't I think of it? It just escaped me. You guys will know, alternative schools that have become much more popular. Anyway, don't want to get stuck on that. So that sets us up in these boxes of expectations. That's the initial programming that we go through, all right? Part of the initial programming. And then we move through stages of development within this narrow programming that conditions us and prepares us to make a living, to have careers, to get externally stable in the world. Okay? We're not going to go into division about right or wrong. It's all part of our development. We're no longer in that phase anymore, because consciousness frequency is now different. And part of that means that we're starting to recognize not one size fits all at all. So we might think, every woman is cut out to be a parent. And so, that took time, right, to unwind that isn't true. Not every woman has the capacity, perhaps, or man has a desire or capacity to be a parent and raise children. And if we're pushed into that box, then we have more distortions, right? We have people who abandon their families, women and men, because that was never in their blueprint. They did not have the capacity. They didn't have that wiring. They didn't have the soul coding to do that. And that might be going to school, right? Going to college, having a job. All of these things are what we've been programmed into, but a soul is deeply more complex than that. All of us are so much more complex with so many nuances and unique energetic configurations. And if we don't understand this, if we don't understand how to work with our blueprint, if we don't know that we have a unique blueprint, we can even stumble around in the spiritual awakening process. All right? Because as our soul comes online, as we anchor this in more fully, we want to listen to where it is guiding us. Not what we think up here, right? But where we are being guided. And by doing that, we access more of our soul presence. We access more of our soul truth. And that means that we can express outwardly as our own higher selves, our own higher divine humanness. But if we don't recognize this, then we can get lost in the fray. We can get more distorted, right? Spiritual distortions, or confused, or try to think that we're supposed to be a certain way to be spiritual. So we need to know how to live from the inside, because this is our guidance system in here, not out there. Inside is how we are guided. And inner listening to that is how we will fulfill our greatest joys, our greatest gifts, our greatest relationships, our greatest service, abundance, prosperity, right? Peace, because these are all internal qualities of the soul. So I hope this is landing with you. I think I'm actually going to do a part 2 of this. I'm going to leave this here. And as I'm talking, I want to continue on this. So if this resonates with you, then hop on over to part 2. And thanks for subscribing if you like this, and liking, and to be continued. All right. Blessings.